Hello. Today, I'm back at it again, talking about my Widowhail Manaforged half-dozen trigger build, because I didn't realize a few days ago, when I came to my conclusion video, that there was actually more improvements to be had in the build. And by that, I mean significant changes to improve it. And all these changes stem around my oversight on one of the newer supports that were introduced to the game, and that is Overcharged support. This support allows us to shock our enemies quite substantially, previous to what we were previously capable of doing. Thus, the increased DPS shock value was greater than our previous DPS that Blast Rain was giving us. Although the shock value was not greater than our main setup Tornado Shot, our Tornado Shot trigger, our Toxic Rain trigger, or our Storm Rain trigger. So all those still stay in the build, but to utilize this overcharge support, and since we took out our Blast Rain, we'll be switching out Blast Rain to Lightning Arrow to again synergize on the shock. So since our build gets a ton of flat damage from our Poised Prism Quiver, in that we get all three damage ailments, but one of them being lightning, since we have a ton of flat damage and we scaled this flat damage quite a bit, this synergizes with our Lightning Arrow, in that our Lightning Arrow shocks enemies as if it's hitting for 300% more damage, and then Overcharge is another 690% shock. Thus, I will show you some clips where we are shocking between the 20% all the way up to max 65% shocks. The reason this gap in shock is so wide is because when we look at the tooltip for Lightning Arrow, you can see that there is a chance for us to be unlucky and roll extremely low on our lightning damage, such that we possibly could only hit for 178 lightning damage, but could be as high as 17,000. And like I said previously, this 17,000 is then multiplied by the roughly 1,000% shock increased value that we have. But in addition to that, we are taking the anomalous overcharge, which is 20% on top of that 1,000. And we did a little bit of rerouting where we now pick up static blows on the tree, giving us a 30% shock effect, and going to it another 20% shock effect at the cost of a little bit of crit chance, but it is worth it. Thus, all in all, if my math is correct, our Lightning Arrow is shocking like it is hitting a target for 1700% damage, and that results in massive shocks. So here are some clips showing that.
The appointed time is here. Victory will be ours.
Incineration. Incineration. The hatchling. Your lives are meaningless!
They became reliant on me. I'm not so foolish.
Why run? What's the point? Why run? What's the point? Everlasting fire!
Now, additionally to our change from Blast Rain to Lightning Arrow, there was another thing that I learned while making my newest Cast on Crit Manaforged build, and that is you can actually link Lifetap to Manaforged support triggers, and they still trigger. So, if you read Manaforged carefully, which I guess I didn't previously, and all the people watching my videos I guess didn't pick up on it also, because they didn't suggest this, but Manaforged will proc as long as your spender is using mana. So no, it will not proc if you're blood magic and all your skills are life cost. Your main spender has to be mana, but your trigger skills don't have to be mana. Now this is very important because this allows our main spender to be pretty much whatever mana we want. So for example, the 3 triggers in my 6-link weapon are Tornado Shot, Toxic Rain, and Storm Rain. All of those will proc even if I cast a bow ability for 1 mana. every single time I cast the 1 mana. So this led me to change my greater multiple projectiles, which I previously was required to use because I needed a 150% mana multiplier. I now changed that to a significantly higher DPS gem, which is Awaken Elemental Focus. But now, since I use a 130% mana multiplier instead of a 150, my Tornado Shot mana cost is now 19. Now, this isn't important for anything linked to Lifetap, but since I still use abilities not on Lifetap, this changes things a little bit. Now, this does affect my 4-link in my boots for Lightning Arrow, as I still want Inspiration in the gem link because it is 4% more damage than Lifetap, and since I want big shocks, I want Lightning Arrow to do as much damage as possible. And whereas Divergent Inspiration support does get my mana cost for Lightning Arrow under the 19 mana, this was not achievable if I put a Divergent Inspiration in my bow 6-link. Thus, I am required to Lifetap my 6-link bow, and I could have Lifetapped my boots, but chose not to. Again, because more damage. But this also changed the 4-link in my gloves, in that the mana cost to proc Ensnaring Arrow and Frenzy is 24 mana, but my Tornado Shot only costs 19. Now, previously, I was fairly against this because I wanted to proc all my abilities every single time I used Tornado Shot, but given the circumstances, I believe it is not necessary for Frenzy and Ensnaring Arrow, since they do so little damage, as they only do like roughly, a million DPS in and of themselves. So realistically, I wouldn't necessarily care if Frenzy only shot once every 5 seconds, because the only reason it's in the setup is to keep up Frenzy charges. And similar to Ensnaring Arrow, even if I only hit the target now once every 0.7 seconds instead of once every 0.35 seconds, the target will typically be still snared, as the target will not move that much within a 0.35 second window. Thus, my uptime on the debuff should still stay high, and my Frenzy charges will still stay up. And additionally, even though I might lose 0.35 seconds on my call uptime, so the boss lasts another 0.3 seconds, this doesn't necessarily matter, because if you're worried about 0.3 seconds on a boss fight, the boss is probably an extremely short boss fight that only lasts less than 5 seconds or so, and that you're worried about this 0.3 seconds. So, again, I'm not worried that my calling is only hitting every 0.7 seconds. So, all in all, if you look at the numbers, once again, this build is proving to be extremely strong compared to what I thought it was going to be. So in my previous conclusion video, I was touting roughly a 32.5 million DPS. This has substantially increased to 39.5 million in realistic scenarios. And this is a DPS increase of roughly 21.7%, which is extremely surprising to me, since I previously thought the build was pretty min-maxed at 32 million. But I was wrong, and happily wrong. Now the last thing I'll talk about is a pretty minor one, and that is, do you want to spec into the Mastery 15% max shock value? So in the videos that I showed you, I am able to proc max shock of over 50% on end bosses like Cyrus and Exarch, but since the damage range of my Lightning Arrow is so large, as it can hit for 200 damage, or it can hit for 17,000, it's extremely RNG if you are going to get into the 60 plus shock effect on some of these bosses. And additionally, since these bosses only last roughly 5 to 6 seconds, you only have 18 chances for your Lightning Arrow to high roll into these high damage ranges to get this 60% shock. Thus, I am not super convinced that the 15 max shock effect is worth it, as at these DPS levels, you're really only going to be challenged by Uber bosses, and since Uber bosses take so little damage because of the reduced multiplier on them, you will never be shocking them for over 50% shock. Thus, my conclusion is that the Mastery is not worth it. So instead, I pick up Primeval Force, which is a good DPS notable, but if you don't want that, you can pick up more life. So, those are the newest updates to the build. Hopefully, I'll be wrong again in the next couple of days, and somehow find another 20% more damage. So, stay tuned for those videos, as this build seems to be getting stronger and stronger as the days goes on. So, if you have any comments and questions, put them in the comments, and I'll get to them. Thanks.